All right. Hey, folks. It's great to see everybody. We are kind of transitioning a little bit further into the Southern Hemisphere. So we're going to go down to Aotearoa and talk about Maori. Uh, yeah, and it's interesting, like, so we'll talk about all these texts, but they all have a whole bunch of language in them, which is great. But I'm not expecting you to translate everything, or there are dictionaries, but at some point, like, you just can't, and this one, it was great because there's a glossary in the back which helps a whole lot. The WH is an F sound. I don't know if you all caught that. That really helps for reading Maori. And then the R is sometimes the R, I think it's a little bit more of a is that like what is it, Spanish or something, where it's almost like a D, like a quick kind of a D, like you'd say, as opposed to Maori. You'll hear people say Maori. So there's just like a little tongue tap up at the top. Um, but we'll talk about that. And so, but just make sure that like, if you're encountering a whole bunch of language, that's because it's a language program. And so that's what they're supposed to do. But I'm not expecting you to be able to sort of like, and so we go through it and we gloss. We get this sort of summary of a lot of these programs and what they're doing. And it gives us a lot of ideas and inspiration. And hopefully we can just go to some of these places someday. I mean, there's a lot of arguments to be made about just like running all over the world and not doing stuff. But to really link yourself up with other language programs, I think is really, really critical, especially programs that have figured out how to turn the corner somehow. Uh, but I thought would do like just another brainstorm. So, oops, hold on, let me share this. So I made another one of these boards. So let's start by going to this board. Let me know if the link works. So this is the program Miro. We're going to use this for a little bit and just chat for a bit. So what I would like us to do is to have a little visioning session. One, when it comes to the language you are working in, what are the problems? And just throw them out there. Even if you think someone has something kind of similar, if you think yours is just a tad different. Um, so again, if we go over to here, click on a sticky note, then we could drop a sticky note here, and we could say not enough speakers. So maybe that's where my starting point is. I think we should be able to fit quite a few of these things on there. And so just throw some stuff up there. What do you think? You can use any color you want. Oh, hold on. People are dragging stuff around. Let me lock some stuff up. Lock that. Hey, who's dragging that around? I'm gonna lock that. Okay, now I think everything's locked up. So we're just trying to throw some sticky notes on here. Any color you want, anything you could think of. Now, if you put it in the wrong spot, you can always drag it over later. And don't adjust anybody else's ideas. Just add. We're only adding. Any color you want, anything you could think of.
So I'll throw the first one out, a standardized curriculum. So like I was talking to a friend the other day and she said she had 50 credits in the Kalinka language and that hardly any of them would be accepted. So I'm thinking that's what that's called. And by the way, this is Sani.
Okay, it's Jeesh. Nude.
Kune, this is Gakhan-san. I came a little late. Would you mind putting the link in? Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, I wish there was a way to just preserve the chat or just like have it pop up when people come in. So, because if you get kicked out as well, like a chat just resets. So we're still identifying anything you could think of, any problems. Yeah, I'm not gonna
region. Oh, sorry. I was just wanting to ask, are we going like one by one with these boxes or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so stick with the problem right now. So we're not going to start working on the carburetor because we got to analyze the rest of the vehicle. And I'm not going to get offended if you put like bad Tlingit language teachers on there, whatever. Like just, we're not trying to, we're not taking things personally here, or else we're not using the board to like attack people either. But just sort of like what's in the way. If we wanted, let's say, what's your target? I think there's about 25,000 Tlingit people. So I'd say I would like to have 5,000 Tlingit speakers. What's that target? What do you think that target is? I'll put these over on the side. Maybe I'll just make a whole new little thing over here. Ooh, color. I'm gonna make it red. Put some text up here. So it's good to be ambitious, but it's good to be, I guess, realistic at the same time. So, and for our target, I'm just saying, like, what's the number of speakers you think that if we achieve that, we feel pretty safe? And it's got to be realistic, because we did this one time, and I was like, I think if we can get to 5,000 speakers, that'd be great. And then they said, why 5? Let's do 20,000 speakers. I was like, okay, also wonderful, but I don't think we're going to get 90% of the population to speak. Like, I'm not saying we can't, and I'm saying we shouldn't try, but I'm just saying, like, what's a good benchmark? Let's say if everything goes absolutely right, 10 years from now, we have blank number of speakers. I'll propose 5. You can make an argument if you want.
Like fluent or learning
end of the year.
speakers?
These people who can speak, they don't need to learn. They can speak at a level of high fluency. They could converse in the language.
What if we aimed lower to like the end of the year?
Oh, we could put that.
Like because then that's like more, I don't know.
So when
like 20. 20.
Well, so I would say right now, the numbers are probably around 80. This would be my guess. 80, 15, and 60. Like worldwide, I think. But so let's do this then. So why don't I move these over here? And then I'm going to say why don't we put it at 2025? And then I'll say 2035. So we're going to do kind of short term. I'm thinking like 4 years from now. And then, because sometimes it's hard to like envision, like, because if you look way far ahead, then it's sort of like, it's just hard to think of. So now I'll say 2050. We'll just round it all up. Nice round numbers. So in that case, then maybe we're looking at, so if we have 80 right now, then I'd say, what do we want to get to? 150? Is it too ambitious? And then 10 years from now, 1,000. I want to add our other languages here as well. And we'll go for just a couple more minutes on problem, right? Get all your problems out there. And while we're thinking of problems, I did see a funny tweet. It was like somebody really missed the mark when they called it emotional baggage, because they should have called it grief case. And I thought that was funny. How am I spelling Deketon? Is this right? Is this wrong?
It has like a, I'll just type it in the chat.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
But then the language is like,
Oh, right. Yes, and that's a good question because I've typed in like what we call them in English for all the other languages, so it's always an interesting question. And we can always adjust that later. It's like the key is whenever you're doing some sort of brainstorm is to just keep in mind that nothing's being published, right? Like we had this little animation workshop and we were being shown a bunch of secrets of animation, and like it's like you don't show this to the outside world. And so this is the internal process. It could be rough. Nobody's looking, well, we're not showing this to people as a finished product. But so by 2025, if we're on the right track and we're being, we're trying to balance between being ambitious and being honest, because, if we said, okay, by 2025, we're gonna have 500 HIDA speakers, like, if we might be setting ourselves up to fail, but maybe by 2035, but I don't know. What do you folks think? What's the number if by 2025 we have this many HIDA speakers, we feel like we're on the right track? Somebody give me a number. 30?
I was gonna say 20 because that's in what, 4 years?
Yeah.
And if we count what we have now and try and double that, maybe we could get to 20.
Okay. What about 15 years from now? Basic 14, right? 100? Oh, I gotta lock this thing. Lock it up.
Yeah, let's go for 100. Because
Okay.
that's 20 a year. No, 15 years.
And while we're sort of continuing to work on this, I just want to say something. So we've got some like major projects to finish this class, and we're going to start working on them on Wednesday. What I'm going to suggest is we do them all as Google documents, and we just collaborate on all of them. And so that there's not any sort of, there's no individual accomplishments other than your philosophy, your teacher's statement. That's the only thing. Everything else we're going to all do together. So just roll your sleeves up and wash your keyboard hands, do whatever you need to do. So what about 2050? If it like we have collectively done the job we needed to do. What do you think that looks like? 500? 1,000?
I was gonna say 500, but I was waiting to see if anyone else in the cohort might have an idea too. But I was thinking 500 too.
And we can always adjust this, right? Just like let's start laying out the vision, right? All of this stuff, and we're going to translate this work into the documents that we create. And you know, this is just an exercise. We're not the authority, but also we have to just develop the skill set, and then we have to ideally we'll be doing stuff like this with basically the whole language community. Once we establish like who's the authority of the language, how does that stuff work? Okay, what about Simshan? What do you think? 4 years from now, it feels like we're on the right track. How many speakers? And I'm thinking total, right? So this is including our relatives in Canada. This isn't just Alaska.
Yeah, that's kind of tricky because there's a little bit of a division there. Though there shouldn't be. I
Right.
think what's currently listed is we have 200 altogether. And that's not, I don't think that's fluent, because in Alaska, I think it's 4.
Right.
Now, currently. 4 or 5.
Yeah, and I heard that some of the
fluent,
estimates in Canada are kind of under 100 these days, but you know, I don't.
Yeah, this is old stats too, so it really may be like 100 or less. So
Okay, well, let's say 100 total right now. So
Sure.
what should we be at in 5 years? Where we feel like now we're moving in the right direction.
We're seeing such, I mean, I've seen such growth on the Alaska side just in the last couple of years of people actively pursuing it outside of established academic situations. There haven't been the academic opportunities until very recently. So like our core group has gone from, 10 people to almost 20 real active folks all the time. Some of those being taking classes and really and are active participants. It's undocumented in that we don't have an attendance system, any of that kind of stuff. But so seeing the active growth that I've seen in the last few years, I think realistically 30 to 50, which is a huge number if we're talking about 100 right now.
So so we're going to say 130, 150?
Yes, I think 130 would be realistic, a realistic-ish goal, and ambitious. I mean, it's almost a third of. It's almost, if you look at that number, it's a big jump, but small numbers still. So yeah, I think that would be realistic.
Okay, before we move on to the next one, a couple of things. So let's wrap up the problems. We're not thinking about problems anymore. If you got one or two you want to, oh, let's not forget this, and we can always add to it later. But we're gonna, while I finish these numbers with folks, we've already done it. We're gonna reverse the problem. So if you find something up here, put a solution down below. Get one solution for everything that you see up there. And if someone already has it, that's fine. But just come up here, and if you see something that you think doesn't have a solution right there, go find it. Or think of it. Okay, so by 2035, the Tsimshian's global population of speakers, what's our hope? Right, and again, not like would love to have 1 million, sure, but like what do we think we can? We got to set these things, because then we say, okay, that's where we're going. Hold on, let me lock this stuff up. I thought I locked this up. How's it still getting drug around? Lock it up. Lock it up. Okay. I guess I didn't lock everything. Okay. So what do y'all think?
One, I don't know. 180.
I think we can say, yeah, like 180, 200 for 2035.
Okay. We're about 30 years from now. We've lived this language dream that we fulfill the responsibilities collectively, and we feel like we have, we'll all be leaning towards retirement at that point. At least, well, some of us. I don't know. Some of you might be like in your 20s still. So I'll be retiring, and I'll be like, look at that. What do you think this looks like?
I think like the best dream would be like 500, like we have it in our schools, and our kids that we're raising are growing up on the language. So that would be about 500.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. And coming back, so when I say speakers, I'm thinking of, if you're looking at a measurable of second language speakers, these would all be probably what I would consider intermediate, high, and above. So they could start their own conversations. They could operate in the language. They might not be able to do everything. They might not you're not gonna have 5,000 people or 500 people that could tell these stories like the master speakers of long ago, but you'd have 5,000 people that could carry on a basic conversation, and then maybe 10% of them, maybe less, could do all the really high level stuff. But these are what I would consider, they could think in the language, they could respond in the language, they could function in the language. It's we'll come back and we'll look at how to define speakers. I think that's something that the community should define. I also think the health of their language is something the community should define. But we'll look at a number of different sort of factors, whether we're using this 10-point scale. I like the ACTFL scale. I think there's some Salish languages that are using it. The Mohawk are using it. I've suggested that Tlingit uses it, and you sort of say beginning, middle, beginning, intermediate, advanced, and each one has low, mid, high. So you just sort of move folks up through there. So for Koyukon, what do you think? In 2025, what would our target be?
I think we could do 100.
And in 2035?
Maybe double it to 200.
And 2050?
2050. Geez, that's like 30 years from now. I have to rethink how I'm thinking about this.
Right? I mean, yeah. And so even for these, when we say 500, yes, but like, and keep this in mind, we don't want to be sitting here in 2050 being like, well, I thought we could do it, right? But at the same time, like, Hawaiian literally probably went from about 150, and 30 years later, you can't count them. they're way over 10,000. However, there are some factors that are different. One language for the entire islands. There's not another actual language that's indigenous to that area that's within 1,000 miles, right? Two is they have like probably 700,000 Hawaiians, right? And so that's a huge factor. So, and I guess everybody go make more people, but outside of that, you have to sort of factor those things in. But at the same time, you say, okay, you gotta be able to, what's the big dream? Just to say, and maybe what we're trying to set up here is say, if we did everything right and everything lined up and everybody somehow got on board, this is what we're gonna, and to feel like, okay, I'm gonna put the pen down, go sell my laptop, and go write soap operas and Tlingit and retire, and then this is what we have now.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's a tough exercise, and we can always come back. These are all editable.
I'm gonna go with 800. Final answer.
You better phone a friend.
We gotta do like Indigenous Jeopardy. We'll do it in our languages. Like I did this little just a vocable version, like hey ya hey ya hey ya hey, right? We'll just like indigenize the theme song. Okay, taking on. What do you think? 4 years, and so like some of our languages, if we're down to 10 speakers, 20, a handful, but what would it feel like? What would the number look like if we felt like 4 years from now, we're really turning the corner? What do you think?
Thinking around 10 or I want to say 10 or like more because we have a language learning circle now, and like there's a lot of like people in it. Unfortunately, I'm in class when it's on, but
Great.
what do you
What
think? 10 or 15?
15? Let's just say 15.
15. Okay.
Then and sometimes you set the bar a little high. 15 years from now, we're 14.
25? Is that shooting low? Or
Well, what's the population? What's the total population of the area? What do you think?
like the whole area is probably like 400 people total, maybe.
Okay, yeah. So
What do
that,
you think? Like, Anna, do you know?
how many Dakenog people are there in the whole world? What do you think?
Oh,
I just had to wipe the Cheeto dust off my fingers.
sorry.
Cheeto ite.
Cheeto eat.
Mm.
Yeah, because they're just Holy Cross and Vic, Shaglook, and Grayling.
Yeah, well, so if
Yeah,
your total
around
population is
there.
400, then that's a pretty big chunk of the population would be 25.
It looks like total population of Dakitan people is 275.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that's good, right? And that might be something where maybe it can get above, right?
Yeah.
If you have a small population, theoretically you can make more substantial changes, but that's just a theory. So then if we sort of say, well, populations are generally rising, so maybe by 30 years from now there'll be 500 Dakenog people, maybe less. But then how many speakers do you think there should be? What's the target?
Yeah, like I think the population of Holy Cross actually like went up over the past like 5 years. So I don't even know anymore. But maybe like 35.
Let's say 30 years from now.
Yeah,
Let's
30
just
years
say
from now.
150. What if we say 150?
Yeah, let's do that.
It's we we're probably asking for 20–30% of the entire population to speak.
Yeah.
But that would be moving things in the right direction. Okay, so here's our just sort of, these are our goals. These are our targets. Again, so we're going to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to create 2 documents for 5 languages. So we get 10 things to make collaboratively in the next month. And thinking about the things we've seen from Hawaii, the things we've seen from Maori, the things we're going to see from Six Nations, Mohawk, is these are going to help us get ideas on what these things should look like, right? So sometimes we're thinking of things that make them distinctively, how can you make this text distinctively Haida, distinctively Tsimshian? So you see that with Maori, where they've got these things in there that absolutely come from a Maori consciousness and the language. But then some of the things in there are going to be like, well, it's for everybody to know, right? Okay, so I think we've reversed the problems. As we go through here, I guess one of the exercises, which maybe we'll do later, is we'll sort of say, oh, has colonial place names been taken care of on here? Let's see. I'm not sure. So I don't see anything. So I'm just going to add one on here that says restore Indigenous place names. Right? So there's the problem. Now I've got the solution. And there's some stuff we could do if we wanted to. We could sort of link these things. Lack of community support. So we can go through and sort of just look at all of these. So maybe what we'll do a bit later is come back to this and say, can we think of more problems? And also, are there problems that don't have a reversal? So reversing the problem, I kind of like that term because it's sort of like, okay, well, let's just switch that around then. Because there's some things like, our job is not to solve lateral violence, but our job is to reverse it. And so to say, okay, one is how do we keep working even though some of us are being attacked? 2, how do we not attack each other? And then sort of and some of those things we'll find will be part of our work. Some of them will be parallel to our work, and some of them won't even be our work. Right? So a lot of the lateral violence, and so in my mind, lateral violence is people attacking each other. That's really all it is. And when they should be kind of doing some different things, right? And there's no reason to, right? Like that person probably didn't steal your wallet, or these other types of things, or it's just this, it's hurting somebody when you should be kind of doing language work. Lateral oppression is where you try to keep somebody from kind of moving through their own progression, right? You try to pull them down, you try to, and these are the types of things, they're related, but I think a little bit different. So let's say somebody succeeds and does something really cool. They get some big award, or they publish a book, or they raise a totem pole, or it's any number of things. And instead of being like, wow, that's so cool that they did that, we try to cut them down. And these are things that happen in our communities. And some of them are things for us to look at, and some of them are things to us to say, okay, well, we know that's a thing. So we're just going to sort of move forward. So let's move on to this one. Thinking of those things, what are we going to do? What's the next move? So just, related, but it doesn't have to be totally informed by that. What do you think we need to be doing? Like to get to here, if we look at this, these are where the numbers get big. Now we have to sort of, and this is like, planning is really interesting. It's very, very interesting stuff. There's people who get like whole sets of degrees in this stuff. It's very complicated getting human beings to sort of find a path to, especially like when you're reversing language shift. Reversing language shift is huge. It's huge because you're tasked with trying to shift the entire culture of individuals, families, institutions, regions, communities, states, federal governments, tribal governments, all of that stuff. But then sometimes you just got to sort of really narrow it down to the little, we're going to just put these two screws together. And these two screws are going to hold this thing together. And this, it's like sometimes you're going to fly the plane and look at what's going on. Sometimes you're going to crawl through the mud and try and figure out what's going on. So just brainstorm. What are some of the things? What do we need to do? What are we going to do? I'll start throwing some things over here. So we should be moving on from problems. We should be moving on from reversing the problem. And we can come back, but just in terms of moving us along through a process. What are we going to do? I'm going to say, well, I'll just type it. Just add stuff. Have fun. Don't think about what we can and can't do. This isn't a, well, if we could only, just throw it up there. It got tiny. Zoom in. Great. Are there literature books available in your languages? Like I know there's some for Tlingit, but is there like a book of stories in Haida or Tsimshian or Koyukon, Dekedon?
Yeah, in Koyukon, Catherine Atla is a big storyteller, and she has a compilation of oral literature.
I think ours are all older, like France Boas and all them, like way back.
In Hudkill, we have our elders back in the 1970s had they formed a group. It was called the Preservation of the Haida Language and Literature, and Robert Coco has a Haida storybook, and but to go back farther, Swanton, his orthography is a little challenging to figure out, but they do have a cheat sheet on his symbols, what they mean today in today's orthography. So he has a lot of stories written in Hudkill. Harrison wrote Old Testament stories in Hudkill.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some, we just need more current ones.
Yeah, so I usually think of these things in like these two sections. One is like figuring out what you have, because I know the Cocos, they had put out a whole bunch of those little books, and so making sure that those are there, reprinting them if needed. Sometimes orthographies change, and just they serve their purpose wonderfully at the time, but sometimes those little paper books just kind of wear out, and so you can digitize them, you can put them in collections, and so one is organizing what you have, and then two is creating new stuff, and then making sure that your whole program is somehow aligned, because people will end up making the same thing, right? And I think it's always easier to make a new color chart or nouns, or it's sometimes you'll end up with 7 different alphabet charts instead of sort of moving on to the next thing, because the next thing is sometimes really challenging. Okay.
I was thinking about that with this writing class, man. Like, he's so much more gripping if it was a Tlingit story or something. Than whatever the hell I'm reading about.
So we did this for almost an hour. I think we're going to stop and come back to it on Wednesday. We'll pick it back because, brainstorming, we're still in this brainstorming process. I'm going to tell you what I think the next steps should be. And there's lots of ways to do this. I'm just demonstrating one of the ways that you could do this. So one is this will be there. The link is still there. You can certainly add to it if you want to. If you want to just take a look at this, if you're feeling inspired, if you like doing this, go for it. Try not to delete anything that's there or change anything that you did not create. If you wrote it and you're like, you know what, I think I want to say this, but try not to get in there and edit anybody else's stuff, which is a little tricky because it's not like it says my sticky note on there or anything. But Wednesday, we're going to start talking about who's going to do it, right? Because this is another sort of, sometimes the workload needs to be distributed. I believe that this was a conversation that they did have in Hawaii. It's okay, you go be the linguist, you go be the teacher of the teachers, you go be the principal. They just sort of divided that work, and then they just end up becoming that thing. And you might be in a situation where you're like, you know what, I never wanted to do this, but you might have to, you might not get to pick. So, and then how is it going to get done? Right? So here's what we're going to do. Here's who's going to do it. Here's how we're going to get it done. And some of this stuff is maybe someone's just coordinating it. And maybe it's a group of people that do it. Because the other thing is, I think sometimes language programs fail because the burden falls upon the few. Because you go to a meeting, and let's say this was the meeting, and I'm not asking you to do this, but let's just say under this scenario, I say, okay, we've done this. Everybody put something on here. We'll get back together on Wednesday and we'll go over it. On Wednesday comes and I'm the only one who did stuff. Then pretty soon I might get frustrated and say, you know what, I'll just do it myself. And then everyone else will be like, yeah, that guy will take care of it, right? And then next thing you know, the program fails because someone gets overworked and frustrated, and it's just too. And so how do you spread that workload? But then there could be a reverse situation where everything's on here and I just go do all the stuff and I don't tell anybody what I'm doing. We come back, I'm like, I already did that stuff. I already did everything. And they're like, oh, well, we kind of wanted to do some stuff. And so it's everything's a balancing act, but everything's also like open communication is always the best. Things get ugly, things get weird, but through processes like this, because then we're going to map it out and we're going to say, okay, now we're going to create copies of these and move a copy, or maybe we'll just move it straight down. We'll just grab it and drag it down. Is this something we're doing right now? Is this something we're doing before we're starting to get old? Or is this something where someday we think this thing's going to happen? Because then you got to kind of strategize, right? Like, so, and this is sometimes like some of these things are sequential. Well, in order to do this, we got to do this, But then you also don't want to get yourself too trapped because you're like, well, I'm paralyzed because I need to do this thing before. So sometimes they're moving parts. And sometimes you can even divide this even further to say like, well, here's the things that are going to impact us at the individual level. Here's stuff at the community level. Here's stuff at the state, federal, tribal level. So that's what we'll do on Wednesday, but we'll just sort of take a break from it now. And we're going to have a discussion about our readings, about our work, and about just sort of, I think sometimes when I study this stuff, I get a little overwhelmed because I'm like, I know what I want to do, but how do I do the thing? I want to build the school. I want to have all the thing. I want to have a million speakers. I want to have all this stuff. I want to smash the racists and put them on a boat and push them out to sea. I want to do all these different things. It's sort of like, but how do you make sure that you're not just flailing in the water, that you're constructing something that's going to go. So, you guys got any thoughts, questions before we move into the specifics of the readings?
When are we putting it into action?
Yeah, putting it into action, right? So like, one is like, here's my question. Here's my big question to you. How do you contribute without getting burned out? And how do you make sure that stuff's going to get done? Those are I guess those are two questions. Those are my two big questions for you. How do you do stuff without getting burned out? And how do you make sure stuff gets done? These are just sort of large level philosophical questions.
Continually recruit. I mean, we're here to become teachers, but then we gotta teach the younger generation to care more about, playing Minecraft or whatever their hobbies are, and saving our indigenous languages. It seems to me the Hawaiians and Maori really showed the young people that not just the beauty of the language, but how it's tied to the language is tied to your spirit, it's tied to the ancestors, it's tied to the land, and then and they want to become involved in that and feel connected as well. Anyway, just a thought.
Wonderful. Yeah. So at one level, like let's just take this language pathways program. So what you all are responsible for and a part of, and it's a little messy sometimes. I mean, it's a lot messy sometimes. But after you guys are done, there's going to be these certificates in place that never existed. We're going to be able to have a certificate for a speaker of an Alaska Native language. We're going to have a certificate for a teacher of an Alaska Native language. Or there's a group of us that are trying to push this even further to a whole college of Alaska Native languages. If you guys want to see some of the work that's going on behind that, I'm going to share a link in the chat. So this is the proposal that a group of us are putting forward to just sort of form a college that's university, throughout the entire University of Alaska network that just sort of pulls the Alaska Native language teachers together and says we're going to develop a bachelor's degree and we're going to develop a Master of Arts in Teaching and we're going to develop teaching certificates and licensure and we're going to work with the state of Alaska and adjust their Board of Education bylaws so that there's room for Alaska Native languages in there and schools and programs. So this is something that's really pushing forward. So this is the next step that I'm taking in terms of like, what do you need to do to sort of push this stuff forward? You need to make the languages official. Then after you make the languages official, now you have to standardize the teaching of them. And so this is all part of a long-range plan that was hatched by working with folks directly in Hawaii and a number of other places, but primarily the Hawaiian folks have been my advisory committee and then figuring out what legal methods do we have to sort of to do this. And so trying to get this onto the agenda of the Board of Regents and the State Board of Education so that we can sort of push these changes to go. Because I think we can all say like everything that has been tried, as wonderful as those efforts have been, they have not resulted in the shifts that we're looking for. I think the way that things are going, you're going to have one language left, maybe two, like 20 years from now. And that's not good enough. And so now we've got to sort of say, okay, here we go. This is it. This is the effort that we need to make. But then this opens the door for future generations and shifts all the way forward. Like I'm really looking forward to the day. Well, I guess it kind of has already happened. So one time, somebody said to me, you got to go talk to you got to go give the uncle talk. You got to go get tough. I was like, all right, what do I got to do? Let me get myself ready and, get ready to ball somebody out and, talk about stuff. And this is just part of like our culture, right? You got to go give the auntie talk or the uncle talk sometimes, straighten somebody out. So I was like, okay, What's going on? Well, so-and-so wants to drop out of high school, go live with grandma and just learn the language. And I was like, okay, well, which one do I want to happen? So, but then I went and engaged in the language with a young person and had a 45-minute conversation about the choices we make, trying to do both, trying to keep our language going, trying to not be totally colonized and assimilated, dealing with addiction and abuse in our families, like with ran the whole sort of spectrum. This is incredibly deep, incredible conversation. Then I got on a plane and flew out of that community, and I thought, I never thought that would happen. Just to do that for 45 minutes, all in the language, and to sort of to provide some influence and say, finish this thing and do that thing, and the person did. But I want to have the day where I could sit with young people and tell stories to them, and they tell stories to me in our language, and we could switch just like that if we want to, and say, you know, like in Hawaii, when you go to their language, if you go to their language conferences, one thing that you'll see is they switch to Hawaiian to do the planning. They just want to say, hey, we're out of toilet paper here, and then this projector's not working, and you're gonna have to go pick up this person. They'll do all of that in Hawaiian, and they'll do it right in front of you. And it's pretty awesome, because then when you speak some Hawaiian, you see like, oh, that's just them carrying out their business, right? And it's kind of neat because you don't get to really see behind the scenes, you know. If you don't speak the language, you don't get to see that information. So, like, just thinking of all these interconnected pieces. I think another thing that I would share with you folks is place name restoration. Yeah, I think, and so how can you help with this stuff? With the College of Alaska Native Languages, you could contact legislators, you could contact chancellors, you can contact regents. Just get a hold of them. Say, hey, have you heard of this thing? We need to make this thing happen. Hey, you know what? I don't want to lose my language. Or this is the thing, I think. Because for a long time, teachers get type M certificates. They're still getting them. But I think it shouldn't be some limited special certificate. It should be just a teaching certificate. Then we just get it. Then they just have it. So it's moving towards equity. And then it's also licensing teachers to say, oh yeah, you know, because these are the conversations I'm also engaged in, is to say, you know, and it's tough because sometimes it sounds like I'm serving my own self-interest. And if people want to criticize me for that, that's fine. But I say, okay, if you're going to hire people contractually and you're paying an elder who speaks the language $35 an hour, and then you're paying a grant writer $150 an hour, we got a problem. And if you're paying a videographer $300 an hour, we got to, I was like, you put the value on it. You decide the value of it. And if the value of the speaker is the lowest thing, then you're saying we value that the least. Because I think an elder, who should be the most, it's the elder. Give them all the money. I don't know, figure out how to do it. But I think these are the things that need continuous re-examination. The second thing was place name restoration. So I think the way to do that is passing a legislative act through the Alaska legislature that says we're going to implement a 5-year place name restoration project. And it's going to be in 4 simultaneous moving phases. Phase 1, identify things that are really close to the language. Shagaluk probably comes from an indigenous language. Skagway comes from an indigenous language. Takatna, right? So all these places. So you say, okay, we're just going to offer a spelling correction. But then you got to sneak the pronunciation question in there, right? Just say, oh, we're just fixing the spelling. No worries. Nobody lose sleep. But now this starts to, you know, and you're going to have to figure some stuff out fast. Like, how do we spell this? Do we have a consensus and move forward with it? That's phase 1. Phase 2, find place names that are directly associated with colonial violence. So an elder told me a story. He said one time these people went to fish camp, and the men went out fishing, and they left the families there at the camp, and these colonizers came along and raped the women. And then they named the place Seduction Point. And I say, I don't want to live with that. I don't want to know that. I don't want that to exist. So then you find those places and say, those need immediate restoration. We need to just completely erase those names. And there's going to be names like that all over the place. Phase 3 is going to be unnamed places. So you could do this batch naming process, because to put an official name on a place is a long and complicated process. But basically, a group would work and say, okay, none of these places have official names. Here's a big bunch of them, put them on there. And then you can bypass that process. And then phase 4 is saying, okay, we're going to be restoring these names and removing the other names. So you start with probably the low-hanging fruit. Is Mendenhall everything? We don't need that. I know it's part of the Juneau landscape, but it doesn't mean anything outside of people hear it and think of a particular place. It's not like Mendenhall died on the glacier defending the universe. And so I'm not trying to say anything bad about Mendenhall and the family. I'm just saying, you don't need your name all over the land. You just don't. All those places have names already. But some of those might be easier than others. So you take ones where you're like, well, I don't think people will fight too hard about this. But then there's going to be some other ones that are going to be medium-sized fights, right? It might be a medium fight, a Mendenhall wetlands, or there's probably a whole bunch. Then there's going to be the big fights, right? Big fights are going to be some of the challenging ones. Greg, Haynes, they're all over the place, right? Usually named after some dude. And so those are some things that we can sort of, like, that's another phase, right? So but in terms of your time, your energy, you could burn yourself out trying to do it all. So I think you got to find what's your target, what's your focus, what's your thing, then what's your contribution. All right. Anybody got any thoughts about that stuff?
Yeah, just really quick, Kune, this is just super, super good. This whole, I downloaded that, what you just shared, and goodness, geez, for doing all the work that you've done over the years. I just had a quick question. I wanted to request permission if I could quote a portion of this part, where you have the state of Alaska needs to initiate a truth, racial healing and transformation. Obviously would credit appropriately. I've been working on a capstone project, and it's sort of relevant to this, but it's more on just history about, I've been working on trying how to teach historical truths, since just the curriculum is obviously lot of just filled with a lot of inaccuracies and misinformation. And so anyway, would it be okay to use any part of this for that, or is this not ready for any of that yet?
No, sure. Use it. Also distribute it. Gather support for the idea. If you know people who are into languages or advocating for them, let them know. We're gonna have to move another mountain. We're gonna have to, but I didn't think we could do it the last time, and so I think I think we can do it, but it's going to take a concerted effort. If it's the will of the people, then you can make it happen. These grassroots things are pretty fun. I think enough time has passed. When we were trying to make languages official in Alaska, the legislative process is really interesting. So we were getting, it was right about this time of year, 5, 6 years ago, so it was quite a few years ago. And we heard that there was going to be some serious opposition and that they were going to try to kill it. So politically, you can kill a bill by just never putting it on the floor. So if you're in power, there's two political parties, Democrats and Republicans. So if your party's in control, you get to set the agenda, and you could just never put it on the floor. Session ends, bill dies, game over. So we heard that that was the strategy, that they were going to keep it from being on the floor. So we found the person who creates the agenda. And we said, okay, that's the person, you know, so this is a little sensitive because we said that's a person we can break them. We can get them to fold under public pressure. And why would we want to do that? Because you got to play these political games, right? You're pushed into these spheres. You got to recognize how they work, and you say, okay, one political career against all of our languages. I'm sorry, but okay, that's what we'll do. So then call the media, say, hey, we're having protests tomorrow. We're gonna fight for our languages. You guys should come. And so we had big cameras there. We had, you know, this guy who was a friend of mine was working in the office, came out and said hi to me, but wouldn't look me in the face because I think it was awkward. Their staff person came out and said, thank you. You know, the senator really appreciates this. It's gonna be on the agenda. It's gonna be. So you just all go home. It's okay. We got it. And I said, okay, well, let me tell you this. I can see the agenda right there. It's not on there. As soon as I see it on there, we'll go upstairs and sit there and wait for you guys to vote yes, but we're not going anywhere. And you can look in that camera, you can tell them that. You tell them what you're going to do, and then we're going to know what you're going to do. So we had to confront people like face to face, right? You know, and anyways, public pressure, but I think one of the things that swayed a lot of people's opinion was just seeing the amount of calls, the amount of, you know, can't really go door to door these days. But we were just knocking on the door. We had people going every single day, calling, just bother them. Because I think a lot of times people don't. The way that politics work is people with a lot of money get a lot of influence, and people without a lot of money, they've got to consolidate their efforts to be influential. Duck Juice.
Oh, sorry. What you were talking about is great, but the only reason I raised my hand was I wanted to say I'm on the same page for not only changing the laws, but for reclaiming our traditional place names. I find it totally disrespectful when people come here and they've been here a total of 5 minutes, and then they say, "Oh, I call this place Punch Bowl Cove," and we're like, "No, it has a traditional name," and they're like, "Well, I don't care about your traditional name. I'm calling it Punch Bowl Cove," and they do this all the time, and they'll call a historic place, "Oh, we call this Cathedral Rock." Excuse me, that's totally offensive. That place is sacred. It's from one of our creation stories where Raven dropped his canoe skids because he was tired of packing them all around the country, and he had a big fight with killer whales on the beach, and so yeah. Anyways, I'm a big supporter of our traditional place names.
Yeah, because some of the arguments are really interesting, right? Because people will say, someone said to me one time, they said, "Yeah, but it's been called this for like 100 years," and they like really put a lot of emphasis on 100, and so and you gotta have, like, I think one of the benefits of reading all this stuff. I know we're asking you guys to do a lot of reading, right? Just piling books up on you. But you gotta have your arguments ready, because you never know when someone's going to present the opportunity for you to make your argument. Because I was just sharing, like, oh yeah, we're restoring all of our place names because, Mendenhall this and that, and doesn't mean anything. And we want to restore the names that were there. And so somebody took offense to that, and they said, well, it means something to me. I've been hiking there for 10 years. And I said, well, I'm not talking about sentimental value. I'm talking about the actual meaning of the word. What does Mendenhall mean? Does it mean something, or is it just somebody's name? Because I'm talking about a different thing. I'm not talking about your value and your attachment to it as a place. And that's when that person said, it's been called this for like 100 years. And I said, okay, well, imagine your grandma's name is Pearl. She's 90 years old. And I met her, and I've known her for and I start calling her Irene. And you say, hey man, my grandma's name is Pearl. And I said, yeah, but I've been calling her Irene for like a week now. Is that a reason to keep calling her that? And then it got kind of ugly from there. But that person, I think, has come around. And so, but the other thing is, like, you can have it, you could have Johnsontown anywhere. You could have all these different things, like, so many different place names, streets and all these different things that they call these things. But to have the distinctiveness of Indigenous place names, I think you try and sell it to the tourism industry. Because if you go to Hawaii, you got all these different things, and people just learn them. People just know. You spend some time in Hawaii, and pretty soon you're just saying those things. But then I think one of the things that they'll try to talk about is say, well, we need to make sure first responders and children can say these names. And then when they say that to me, I'll say, great, because we could teach this language to anybody. And if they're first responders and kids who live here, they should know it. They should know how to say this stuff. Like, if you lived in Hawaii and you couldn't say any of the names of those places, just get out of there. Just go live somewhere else, right? Because you can learn it. People can learn it. But I think on the other side of that, I think we saw this on our brainstorm activity, is you create an education campaign. Make it less scary, right? Because people are publishing letters to the editor. Some of them are just straight up editorials. And they're saying, hey, nobody's going to be able to say this. And you gotta have counter arguments always ready for everything. And you gotta stay calm and collective and in control, and not like, because it would be easy to just make fun of people or to yell at them or to do any of this stuff, but what I want you guys to be able to do is, like, say there's some politician, like this one guy, he said he's had a bad argument, right? So when we were first starting to push some of this legislation through, this other person started, I think, by saying, well, my ancestors spoke Russian. When they came here, they learned English. And then he said, oh yeah. Well, my ancestors, they spoke Norwegian. When they came here, they learned English and they spoke English. That was their argument. And so, and then they kind of, what do you call it, filibuster? They just sort of talked until we ran out of time. And when I realized they weren't going to give us any time, I was getting mad. So then I took what I was going to say, and I crumpled it up, and I said, okay, I'm going to tear apart what they just said. And so I came back, and my testimony, I was sitting with Selena Everson Kasech, and she went first, and I went second, and she just gave them like the emotional content, what it was like.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
What it was like to be restricted from speaking your language, and then I went from sort of more of a technical and sort of like why we need to do this kind of a thing. But what I did was I just did an entire counter argument on what they said. And after that thing, that guy, he came and shook my hand, and he asked me for a copy of the speech. And so I was like, yeah. And then he became a co-signer on the bill. So like, you got to be ready for that stuff, and you've got to be convincing, and also like, it's very tempting, I think, to start making fun of people and doing this. And sometimes I'll do that stuff on like social media. But when it's like in the moment, like you got to know how to navigate and how to take some control of some of these systems. Okay, my watch said I need to stop talking, so somebody else say something.
You gotta use the force in those situations, huh?
Yep. These are not the droids you're looking for.
I thought Siri was trying to argue with you. I was waiting for a counterpoint.
These devices are so smart that they just sit around being like, when would be the funniest time to say, I can't understand you? And they're just like, okay, now.
It'd be cool if some of that like signage, like I was sat in on this thing with the Forest Service, and it sounds like they want to change like a lot of the things that they're doing. I mean, why can't school projects, instead of making more drums or more tanas, be making signs for Nancy Creek, whatever this is right over here, and just put the traditional name there? Like a class could do that. They'll learn the name, they'll make the sign. They can move on. They could probably dish out like 50 of them in a school year or more. And then the Forest Service, it wouldn't cost them a dime. It wouldn't change anything. I mean, things like that.
Right. Well, yeah. So like, there's the city and borough of Juneau, and they're doing some more. They're getting there. Like this new sign project was pretty good. Uh, and I think these are things you can do, like real world things. So like writing papers, that's great. But now I'm like, okay, now let's start making some real actual changes as well. And I'm not trying to disrespect like writing papers. You need to do that and get that practice. But also, like, you could propose a project to the city of Juneau. Just say, you know what? Let's put these signs up. Help us make these signs. And I bet you they'll bite. You know, it's just we need more people to do that work and to propose it. What would it look like? And when I was down and we went to Whistler about a year and a half ago, and when we were driving up there, we saw like big signs, and it was in the Indigenous language in the big letters. Yeah, it's little like Johnson Creek, right? And so we have that. The little right now, I think the big letters would say like Mendenhall River. And then in little teeny tiny, you'd see like whoosh it's Let's just switch that around. And so because it's a prestige thing. Duck juice.
Sorry. I like the reading on the Maori curriculum guidelines, and this wasn't an argument for making schools bilingual, but we might be able to use something like this when we're fighting the legislature and saying we want um, our schools to be bilingual or multilingual. Anyways, in the Maori curriculum guidelines under cognitive, they said the students that were learning English and Maori, they were going to have more ways of learning, knowing, and knowing more about their own capabilities, and that they might reflect as they compare their first language with what they are learning in Maori, and that they ask questions and challenge themselves, and they learn how to learn, and also you become more creative and therefore better problem solvers. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love how they just really summarize. It presents a bunch of stuff for us to have in our toolbox in terms of being ready to make those arguments, how this helps everybody, right? Because a school board member told me, well, I'd love there to be a Tlingit language immersion school in Juneau, but I'm really worried about segregation, right? And I said, oh, well, I never said like this was only for Tlingit people. It's like anybody could go. They'd just be choosing not to go, right? So those are you got to be ready for those things and people, and there are some people out there who are just totally against the idea, and who are, you know, they subscribe fully to racist ideologies, but that's actually a really small percentage of people, I think. Well, maybe it's not really small, but I think the vast majority are they're just going with the status quo, and the status quo is let the languages die. And people don't really want to vocalize that, and I think they'll get a little sensitive sometimes when you call it to their attention. But there's a variety of techniques, and I would agree. Like these Maori materials were wonderful, and so Wednesday we'll talk about them a little bit more concretely. Uh, the Maori was the model for Hawaii, and then the Maori was modeled after a lot of kind of, I think they were both modeled after French immersion programs in the Ottawa area, where they weren't trying to teach the language, they were trying to maintain the language. Like, hey, let's not lose French. And so that was their ideology, was we're not teaching the language, we are using the language to teach all of the content. That is such an enormous switch. If you can get your community to make that switch from a language that's learned to a language that's used and taught through, you'll get it. The fluency will skyrocket, but it'll be really awkward for a while. And I think that's just the reality. There's gonna be a bunch of stuff you don't know how to say. You have to stumble through a whole bunch of stuff, and what you'll find is if people haven't raised children in the language for generations, like people might not even know how to. You know, the simplest, you know, we were asking like change a diaper. I say change a diaper. I say change a diaper. At this big panel of elders. This was back in probably 2008. No, sorry, 2015, maybe 2014. And we're all laughing, just having fun. And then towards the end, this one elder, she stood up. She said, you know, you asked me how to say change a diaper, and I couldn't think of it. I just felt like I was right back in boarding school. Someone's going to hit my hand. And then she started crying. We're all crying, you know. So it's like, it's a delicate thing. But to sort of to watch these places that have done it, and then to say, okay, let's do that. Victoria?
Oh, one of the things I was thinking, it really doesn't have to do with our readings, but I was thinking how we get all three of our languages in places where we need them is to have, I don't know if it would be Alaska or the university, but to have teachers for like beginning, intermediate, and advanced in all three languages, where students from all over the state could just log on to like a Zoom class. We could get our languages out that way, because our communities are so spread out, like we can't be everywhere at once. If we really learned how to use Zoom and other technologies to get our languages, if we can make it mandatory that way for our children to be able to get our languages.
Yeah, I agree. And then, like, we're not going to try and do everything the exact same way, but I think we can come up with some concrete benchmarks. Like, what does it mean to run an advanced language course? And for me, I would say, well, the first thing is at least 50% of your time should be spent entirely in the language, right? And so that's one of the core sort of components. And we want to make sure that, yes, we are teaching all three of these languages at all three levels every single semester, and we have to figure out a way to get rid of tuition. And I don't know how to do it, but I think that's the next big move, is saying we are always going to be offering all three levels of all three of these languages every semester, and we are never going to charge tuition for them. I don't know how we do it, but I think that would open the doors a lot more. We also need folks to be teaching those advanced, and you know, we're going to need more teachers, because if you did that, you might have 100 people per class. You don't know. I mean, so we're having to cap them right now. We couldn't find enough teachers to match the beginning level interest for all three of our languages, but I think we'll get there. So yeah, that's probably another part of the next phase, is making sure that we're doing that and making sure that people can afford it. And they shouldn't have to pay for it. They really shouldn't. I mean, that should be a community service on behalf of the state of Alaska. as part of making amends for all the things that have gone on. I think it should be federally supported. I think it should be state supported. And I think there should be some churches that are like, oh, sorry for what we did. We said burn the totem poles, and we were the scrubbing kids' mouths out with chemicals. So here's a check, at least, right? I mean, there's got to be something. And it can't be just the indigenous communities that are responsible for it.
We should be getting some of that tax-free church money, at least.
At least.
They should start taxing churches and give it to that purpose. Is there currently a like a fund or some sort of investment to donate to contribute to?
Yeah, so there's a number. So PETA's has been paying for a lot of language scholarship. There's the Emma Marks Memorial Fund, which is for Alaska Native language study. And then there's and then there's a number of things. I know they had talked about the Ruth Demert Scholarship starting at See Alaska. And so, yes, there are. And then my goal is to try and sort of figure out, like, what do the numbers look like? How do we just funnel all that stuff into one? Because it's probably going to have to be paid for from multiple sources. But I think there's a way to do it so that the doors are just blown open. And we could, if the university could come out and say, we understand what's on the line, and we have done what we can, and we will never charge tuition again for these. And I don't know. We'll get there, but I don't know how to get there, but we'll find it. Yeah, grants, funding, foundations. Okay. We're out of time, folks. We'll keep it up on Wednesday. We'll just pick up right here. We'll do a little bit more on the brainstorming board. We'll come back to the readings, and it's always great to visit with you folks. Thanks for all your hard work.
Who needs some?
Cheese.
Cheesh. Toixen.
Tidogden.
Tidogden. How
So you saw both of us?
Thank you.
Oh.